You've just seen the 17 Casas global outreach workers that we spend a lot of investment of time and energy with. They're all very, very special people. In the book of Matthew, Jesus gives his final words. And the final words of anybody are pretty significant. There's one thing I want you to know. Remember this before I go. Last words are important. So here's what he says. He's ascending into the heavens. And he says, verse 19, "Therefore go and make disciples," that's his marching orders, "of all nations." Get the gospel out, he says. "Baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." And now we've got to teach them. "Teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." His last words. Seems like right before that, he explained how it's supposed to happen. Over in Acts chapter 8, verse number 1, I want to show you a little picture of Palestine here, what he said. In Acts 8:1, he said, "You're to be my witnesses, first of all in Jerusalem," which is right here, easy to find, north end of the Dead Sea, about a third of the way to the Mediterranean. Oh, it's there. "I want you to go in Jerusalem." It's like Tucson. And then Jesus said, "I want you to go into all Judea." It's like Arizona. "And then I want you to go into Samaria." That's like the United States. And then he said, "I want you to go to the uttermost parts of the earth." Those are his marching orders. That's what he has in mind for us. And so we see what they did over in Acts chapter 8, verses 1 and 4. Here's what happened. A few weeks later, nobody's left town. They're all there. Saul was watching and giving approval to the stoning of Stephen after he preached the gospel clearly. And that day Stephen was stoned. A great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem. And everyone except the apostles were scattered throughout what? Judea and Jerusalem. Where did Jesus tell them to go? Judea. And they didn't do it. And those who scattered preached the word wherever they went. Here's the point. They didn't do what he asked him to do. So he said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll send you a little persecution. That'll get you out of town." And so the church began with a persecuted church getting out of town. And I don't want us to have to be persecuted to do this. Do you? Of course not. I want us to fulfill his commission because we love him, because we care about people, because he asked us to do it. What a special thing. Now, I want to take a moment and just show you a litany of the things that our global outreach ministry did just last year. When Scott gave me this list, I was kind of blown away. And I thought, well, I usually don't like to give you a long list. It's kind of hard to assimilate. But would you bear with me and assimilate some of this? What did Global Outreach do last year? Well, we gave $500,000 invested in the kingdom through the monies that you all gave to our Global Outreach programs. Here's where the money went. $25,000 went to finish out Brian's hangar there in Zambia. $175,000 went for that coffee house that Dan's been talking to us about. We spent $55,000 on pastors and wives conferences throughout Latin and South America. We bought a used Land Rover for $18,000 to use in Mongolia. Now, that's an interesting place to be. There aren't any roads up north where this goes. Get a little GPS so they can travel, know where they're going out there in the boonies to help these folks know about Christ. $2,000 we helped set up an English as a second language camp. $4,000 for emergency funding for housing for refugees here in Tucson, and $40,000 we spent for cross-cultural workers in China. Now, that's a lot of invested money around our world. It was made possible by our gifts. Now, let me talk to you just a bit about the trips that were made. See, in addition to that, a lot of our folks went overseas. For example, short-term trips. Well, this is in the Bible. Acts 13, verse 1. Our church is sending out their folks. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul." See, the Holy Spirit's giving direction for Barnabas and Saul to the work that I've called them. I've called them to go overseas. And after they prayed and fasted, they placed hands on them and sent them off. That's what we often do with our ABFs. Or when you go, lay hands, pray you off on your ministry. Over in Acts 15, verse 22, another example. The apostles and the elders and the whole church decided to choose some others to go help Paul and Barnabas. So they picked Judas, Barsabbas, and Silas. You recognize his name. And they sent them out for the work. We sent out a lot of people. Short-term trips this past year, 23 Casas Adult Bible Fellowships sent 470 members on 13 trips to visit and deal with every single one of our 17 global workers. 8 Casas teachers traveled to a Muslim country and had 64 Muslim school teachers teaching them teaching principles. Our adult Bible fellowships, 10 people went to 300 Muslims to lead a conference in Southwest Asia. 9 adults went with Julie and me to went to Peru, and they were prayer teams, and what was fun was while we're teaching, they're going around praying and doing healing services in the back of the room. 6 of our Bible fellowships sent their directors directly over the border for very particular teachings on how to help poor families, what we can do to help the poor in Mexico. Our Casas high school students, what a special time for them. Went to one Asian country, 27 of them, to share with incoming college students how to speak English. And of course that resulted into a lot of sharing of the gospel. Parents of our teenagers made preparations for high school students in Mexico to give outreach to 550 children in a large Bible study teaching in Emuris. 143 of our middle school and high school students painted schoolhouses and buildings and ran children's programs for 400 children there in Mexico. 99 middle schoolers led Bible studies for 150 native children in cells. 9 of our Casas nurses and doctors went to Thailand and gave medical treatment to 240 hurting people there. Isn't that a great thing? I think that's worth a good applause for the Lord and for all these folks who took part in doing this. And, Scott Brendan, who heads up our global outreach, and Ann Crippen, and Krista Wilkinson and Susan DeBake have done a marvelous job. It's their job to make all this happen. And I'm really excited about what they're making happen. When Julie and I first came here to pastor a number of years ago, we wanted to go to a place where there were lots of lost people and not many Christians. You see, there were plenty of churches in Texas. In fact, one of our evangelism professors said, you'd better have a calling to stay and preach in Texas because Texas doesn't need any more preachers. Well, he was right. And so we looked to go to a place. When we moved here, this was a Wild West town in many ways. Not many churches, hardly any Christians. This was kind of like a mission field. But we really wanted to go overseas. And after being here about 3 years, we filled out all the applications, went to several different agencies. We're going to go overseas. We're about to send them in, and it was like God said to both of us, this just isn't right. And so we prayed about it, and it was like God said, okay, you cannot go overseas. Here's what you do. I'm calling you to raise a whole lot of money and raise a whole lot of people and send them overseas. And for me personally, it's kind of fun to look at what's going on just last year. Whole lot of money, whole lot of people. That's basically been my work. It was interesting. We were over in a Middle Eastern country. I was about 35, teaching on principles of spiritual growth. And during one of the dinners, it was like God said to both of us, okay, I'm going to let you have half your dream. When you get in your 50s, you're going to get to teach these all over the country, all over the world. And we kind of tucked that in the back of our heads, never thought much more about it, only all the time. And now with the transition time, Julie and I get kind of a dream fulfilled. We've taught and traveled in 39 different countries, teaching the gospel, teaching mostly Christian pastors. That's kind of the calling we have, and having an absolutely wonderful time. We never dreamed that we'd end up in the 1040 window. What's the 1040 window? It's called the most strategic mission area of the world. It's the area across northern Africa, the Middle East countries, and through all the stand countries. I didn't want to go there. I wanted to go to deep, darkest Africa, where the real missionaries were. And yet, through a long story, God led us, and we've spent the rest of our last 35 years here at Casas focusing on this most strategic area of the world right now. Wouldn't you believe that's true? It's significant that we're there. One of the things that's been fun for Julie and me is because we've transitioned, is to put together a website. We took about 3 years getting this ready. We launched it last June. Many of you have been on preachit.org. Now we're in 126 different countries. Can you imagine that since June? We've had over 120,000 visitors in 7 foreign languages. Julie's put together, for example, the Arabic Bible. The audio Arabic Bible went online just this week. So folks all over the world can click into that. And we've got almost 30 volunteers who are translating all of our materials into these different languages. Never dreamed this would happen. It's all free. And the reason it's all free is because of all these volunteers. And we made it free so that pastors around the world and Christian workers can tap in and get something for free and not have to pay for it because they don't have any money for these things. A couple weeks ago, one of my Ask Roger columns had over 7,000 readers, you know. So we're realizing God's even bringing that dream true for us in some special ways. And I just wanted to rejoice with us because we're kind of excited about that. Now, all of our global outreach is tied very carefully into Casas theology. Our theology, as we put that together, basically says lost people matter to God. So, lost people matter to us. That's what we have here for our church's theology. That's what we look at for our global outreach so that it matches very carefully. You know, Glenn has talked to us a lot about the 3 different types of churches in America today. One is the socio-political type of church. The socio-political church is trying to get involved in society by influencing all the laws and changing behavior by forcing people to follow the laws. And if you don't follow them, you're what? You're judged and hollered at. Judgment is true. Our nation needs some. But what did Jesus say we reach the world by? Love. And of course, you know that 78% of Americans now say the most judgmental segment of American society are the evangelical Christian church members. This is not helping us. Oh, maybe a little here and there. But that's not how you go at their hearts. Of course, there's what's called a fortress church. And the fortress church says basically we better build a fort and protect ourselves and us from the evil influences of the world out here. Because see, if they get in the church, they'll contaminate the place. And instead of being the enemy, see, these people are really the what? Victims of sin. They're not the enemy. They need a Savior. Well, Glenn describes us, and I think it's right on, as what he calls a kingdom church. And the goal is to advance the kingdom. See, it's like here's your church, but you want to be able to let the victims in because this is a hospital for people tied up in sin. Isn't that true? At the same time, you want to be able to move out and penetrate the culture. See, to me, this is what Jesus said, isn't it? You do Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the world. That's what our global outreach is built around. Kingdom Church works like this. So we have one of our high school adult parents who's got a Bible study fellowship, and one night 2 or 3 girls show up, and they're sure not Christians, not churched. They're talking about, drugs and sex, and our Casas kids are exposed to it, and they get real nervous, especially when the kids talk about how much fun it all is. And some of the parents are a little upset, having their kids influenced by these non-church kids. Wait a minute. Our kids can take their stands and be taught values and morals. See, one of the girls said one night in the Bible study, we don't know what it is about you girls, but we want to be here because you've got something attractive we don't have. See, that's the kingdom church. That's going out to the whole world. That's what we exist for. There's another dimension to this. We've talked for years about our Casas philosophy in terms of spiritual growth. Here's a little door, salvation. You grow as a spiritual child. You work through some of the difficulties of being a young man or young woman. You go to be a spiritual mother or spiritual father. Now, here's where this takes place. See, the goal of this, here's what Jesus said. First the stalk, then the ear, then the mature corn in the ear. Got all the kernels. And we become, he says, kernels. Now look, the job of a spiritual mother or father is not to be separate and say, boy, look at all us guys together. We've got a great church. We're having a great time. We're all spiritually mature. No. Remember what Jesus said? Except the little kernel of corn fall into the ground and die, it's what? What did he say? Worthless. If we don't grow to maturity, and then what? We give our lives for the kingdom and die, what's he say? We bring forth much what? Fruit. So many of us who've been Christians a long time, it's good to remember that the reason we've been Christians a long time is so that we can die and help others support and produce fruit. That's our Casas theology. Now, just for fun, let's assume you'd like to go on one of our short-term trips. Would that be okay? Let's say you're going to go on one, all right? Let me give you some observations as to what you might feel, find, or discover. Now, occasionally people say to me things like this. You know, we're sending 27 high schoolers over there. What a waste. We ought to take that money and give it straight to the missionary. Why are you not giving it to the missionary? It'll do some good. Here's our philosophy. Let's take that money and send 27 middle schoolers to one of these Asian countries. And they get a heart for global outreach. And they come back like Brian, and before you know it, one of them's full-time in service. And God willing, the other 27 get a heart for global outreach. And see, what might happen is we've got some of these kids who are going to grow up, and they're going to give money to global outreach for the rest of their lives, see? See, it's an investment. For you adults who go, you see these things, and you come back, and you're excited. And the money we used to send you was an investment for what you do when you get back here. You do a little ministry there, but change lives back here. So, for those of you who go on trips, you're going to have a great time. Let me give you a few observations. These are my observations. If you go, you'll have a little different set. See? Some of you will go and get all excited. Did you see God do this? Now listen, I've heard this. Others you go and say, did you see that Turkish toilet? I mean, that's where they were focusing. Okay? So everybody's got their scheme, of kind of what they focus on. But here's my observations. If you go, here's some things you'll discover. People are just like us. Only their culture's a little different. Sure they are. See the folks in Mongolian dress over there in the lower left-hand column? We don't dress like that. But they're just like, if I were to walk up to any one of them and say, how's your teenager? Some of them would start crying, just like us. You got cancer? Some of them would cry. They're just like us. They dress differently. They look differently. We were in one bazaar in the Middle East, and they had all these belly dancer costumes. I said to Julie, man, that's cool. I'll buy you one. She said, no. I said, well, at least put it on the dressing room and model it for me. I will never do that again as long as I live. See, I'm not going to do that. But they're people like we are. They're just like we are. Culture's a little different. First time Julie and I went overseas, we hadn't been trained well. We went with a little different organization. And they didn't tell us that when you go to Brazil, the dirtiest sign you can do is to give the American okay sign. See? That's okay here. Over there, it's like taking your tall finger, see, and using it in ways you shouldn't. I didn't know that. They didn't tell me that. So I'm getting up for my first sermon. This youth choir sang a great song. They finished the song. I was so impressed. I got up and I turned to them and gave them the double okay. Really well done. Good job. And this hush falls over the congregation. I had no idea why. And all of a sudden, one guy started laughing, and the whole place just broke into laughter. See, and they're going to give us some grace. We will not let that happen to you, okay? You'll go through training, cultural training for your country, and you'll just know some things that maybe you ought to know when you head overseas. Another observation. You'll encounter friendly people who love to entertain Americans. They love us. They're fascinated by us. They want to know about our culture and what's going on with us. It's interesting. We will sit with Pakistanis and Afghanis and Iraqis and Iranians and Kyrgyzstanians. And we just sit there having lunch or dinner. We're having a good time talking together. And often the observation comes up, it's the governments that cause us all these problems. Well, of course, there's other racial issues that go on. It's the government where they draw these lines. Because we all get along just fine as normal people. You know what I mean? And you'll find that you don't need to worry, are they going to like me, accept me? They love Americans. And they love to sit and chat with us. The welcome is warm. Here's another thing you'll observe. It's safe over there. See, a lot of us hear about, well, there's a bus bombing over here. Well, yeah, there was one, okay, over there. That's all that happened that day, but we play it all over the news. I think, well, all they do is bomb buses over there. No. It's safe over there. You will be safer in the streets of Istanbul, as you see there on the left-hand side, at midnight, than you'll be in South Tucson tonight. There'll be more murders in Detroit in the next week than there'll be in Istanbul all year. It's just safe. Girl on the right, she's 16 years old. She was our translator in one communist country that had just been liberated. We're going down these stairs. Julie and I have been teaching in this communist factory all day. And it's a little about midnight. We're going down these stairs in the back, coming down this spiral. And I see this big guy coming up the stairs. And I'm thinking, here it is, midnight. I got this 16-year-old girl. I got Julie. And here's this giant, strapping ex-soldier, obviously, coming up the stairs. And I look at my muscles and realize, we don't have a chance. He can take us all down if he wants to. And he walked by and he smiled and he said, "Dos vidania." He passed by. Whew. I said to our translator, "Weren't you afraid?" She looked at me, "Afraid? Why would I be afraid?" Well, he was a big guy. We're tucked back in the back of this factory. No. She said, "No, we're not afraid. We don't own any guns." See, they don't have any guns. They're not afraid. It's a pretty safe place. You'll discover a lot of poverty. That's hard to watch. When you go into the old communist Russian, Soviet countries that have been liberated, you'll find housing like this. It goes on for miles and miles. How the Russians did it. They took a little piece of concrete and they built a little flat about 400 square feet, 20 by 20 at the most, clipped it up into 5 rooms, lifted it up on a crane, and they just stacked these things. And it's damp and it's dirty and it's dank and the elevator only fits one person at a time. It's not a fun place to live. That's where everybody lived over there. They didn't have a lot. And you'll see some poverty. There's 3 classes in most all these countries. There's the rich folks, a few of those. There's usually a small middle class, and then it'll break your heart. Most folks are very, very, very poor. We were doing a conference in Latin America. It was the poorest country I've ever seen. Had 140 pastors and wives come into our conference. We began to realize some of them were skipping days, didn't come every day. And when it was all over, I asked why, and here's what I heard. Well, we only had bus fare for 3 days. We couldn't come all 5. And I said later somewhere, why didn't we know this? They didn't know it either. We could have given them all bus fare. The money I had in my pocket could buy them all bus fare. Pretty cheap, but they didn't have that. So you're going to see some of that. It'll tug at your heart. You'll be walking down the street, and you'll see this little boy or girl with a little cup hanging up, dirtiest clothes you ever saw. Put some coins in your pocket. Now, they'll tell you, don't give them any money because they'll all mob you. Yeah, they will. They'll all mob you. Well, put a lot of coins in your pocket. Give them some money. Then every once in a while, you'll pass this little boy or one guy that I saw. I don't know, his legs were cut off above his thighs. He had little pads down there. He's sitting on the sidewalk, and nobody was giving him money. Well, you reach in your billfold. We got more than they do. It just breaks your heart to see this. So put some coins in your pocket when you go. Bless them and bless you. We were in one country where it was a status symbol to own a necktie. And we went into this country, we brought 75 ties. And you should have seen these 70 guys jockeying for those 75 ties. They'd never owned one. One 75-year-old man came and said, now I can be a real pastor because real pastors have ties. He was 75 years old, finally got his first tie. It's hard. But man, it is so humbling, and it's good for us to see some of these things. They're hungry for food. If you go over there, you don't find any fat people. They're just not fat because there's not a whole lot of food to eat. I want to show you a slide, if they'll turn the picture, of a family that Julie and I spent a week with. And notice there's not much fat on those people. Happy people, just not much to eat. It was tough to watch. Julie and I were recently in one Middle Eastern country. We went to a country where really nobody spoke English. It was way back in the corner of Asia. And even the church leaders didn't speak English except the director, and he spoke very broken English. And so they brought us in from the airport, and they put us in this, and they had an office building for their staff. They put us in one of the rooms, said, you spend the night here. It was a pretty nice room. A little refrigerator. He says, we put some food in the refrigerator for you, so long. And we open up the refrigerator, and there's a little bread and a little cheese. And we dawn on, that's all we're going to get. I call it the Armenian diet. I've been working on it. So the next night, he took us to the little grocery store around the corner. I said to Julie, let's have some cereal tonight. He said, what cereal? What do you mean, what cereal? Haven't you had some cereal? Never eaten cereal. I said, well, it's like this. I took him to the little cereal aisle. There were 4 or 5 different boxes. Pulled out one, and he looked at us. I didn't even get the Kellogg's, the import. I got the cheap little domestic. And we checked out, and he looked at me, and it was like this. How in the world can you spend that much money for a box of cereal? Do you know how many tomatoes and lettuce that might buy? Boy, that's a humbling moment. But it's good for us. You'll also find some folks who are hungry for the Word of God. 98% of all organized Christian teaching in the world, 94% of all the organized Christian teaching in the world takes place in the United States. And they're so hungry for things. I remember one Greek pastor I chatted with a bit. We were talking about books. He only had 3 or 4 volumes to pastor with. He said, how many books you got? Well, I was embarrassed. I got over 6,000 volumes. I love books. Collect them for years. Love to read them. This guy's got about 4. And he begged me, please, you've got so many. Please, send me some books. There's a communist ex-factory Julie and I were teaching in. There's about 200 pastors who'd come from all over the country for this session. And they said, okay, you can teach from 8 to 6. We'll take a little break for lunch. So I taught from 8 to 6. Took a little break for lunch. We had borscht. We were there, we had borscht for breakfast, borscht for lunch, borscht for dinner. And if you're lucky, you had a little piece of meat, maybe. But I got to tell you this. It's the best food I think I ever ate. It was seasoned so well. And the setting. Look forward to that borscht. So I'd preach 8 to 6. And the first night when I finished, the director said, I know you're tired, but they'd like you to teach some more. Do you think you could go from 7 till 9? So I taught from 7 till 9. 5 days, 8 to 6, 7 till 9. And they couldn't get enough. So when you and I send money for supplies and materials and teaching, you realize how powerful this is to them. That's why our Preach It, Teach It's designed with all these Christian teachings and doctrines in multiple languages, because they don't have anything, but they're hungry as they possibly can be for the Word of God. As we were leaving this country, we received 2 gifts. There were a couple of stone grave cutters who put together a gravestone, and in it was etched Elijah receiving from the raven. Remember that story? Because I talked in my spiritual growth teachings about Elijah, and I talked about Mary pouring her oil out, and so they gave Julie and me this beautiful, beautiful vase in memory of that. Got the gravestone nailed to my wall, screwed to my wall. Got this little vase. We keep it on our dressers, reminders. And, okay, this was just for me. But they started calling me the teacher. And of all my greatest 10 thrills, that's in the number 1 to 10. They just called me the teacher. That was so special. That's what Julie and I do over there. We mostly team teach. In fact, I don't ever teach alone anymore. But we team teach. That's what we do. Got to the airport. These guys gave me this 70-pound tombstone. As I was heading to the airport, I opened my suitcase. There's no room. And I'll just cram this in there. And I know I'll have to take out all my clothes at the airport. I'm way overweight. Got to the airport. She said, hey, that's over 110 pounds. You got to take some out. Open the suitcase. She said, what's that? Well, I told her. She zipped my suitcase back up, stuck a little tag that said heavy, and just pushed it right on through. Wasn't that sweet? That was so nice. Now, when you go, you will find some very creative and dedicated missionaries. You can't believe the things, just like Dan does when he sits his own self-sustaining business. Brilliant man. Here's a guy in the Middle East. He's got a ministry going there. He lives there. He's a national. He shows me this big container with all these empty airmail envelopes. He says, how many do you think are in here? I said, 15, 20,000. No, 1,250,000 of these. They'd counted every one. These were from the last 25 years of all the folks who'd responded to their radio station. See, they got to do it quietly over there because you can get in trouble if you're a Muslim asking for Christian things. Well, they don't do this anymore. Everybody's got email. So they send out their radio signals and programs, and they've got downstairs 30 or so computers and a person at every one just answering the emails that have come in that day. They answer every single one. And they've got 3 shifts. You know, what some of these guys and gals do is just absolutely astounding. However, they are kind of needy. You'll find that a lot of these folks are isolated and lonely, and they make sacrifices. Like, for example, what do I do with my kids when they hit high school age? If I want to stay here, I've got to send them to boarding school for their education. That's pretty traumatic on a high school freshman. So do we leave our ministry and go take care of our kids? That's a big deal out there for these folks. They go through a lot of suffering. You know what we have our Casas folks do? We have them just come with us and we say, okay, I remember one conference, we had about 200 nationals from all over the 1040 window, and we'd taken about 25 Casas folks, and we said to them, okay, Julie and I teach some, and you guys just sit down and debrief these missionaries. See, that's one thing you can do, because they don't have anybody to talk to. Nobody listens to them. And sometimes you'll sit there for 4 or 5 hours as they pour their hearts out, and you realize the catharsis for them and the ministry you give to them. You'll find some marvelous people. And how about a few serendipities? What's a serendipity? Well, I didn't expect it was going to happen, and it happened. For example, there's Ari up there in the upper left-hand column with 2 buddies he met in an Asian country, and they've struck up an email relationship. That's pretty special. Over on the top right, there's a tourist guide. When you go, you won't just only go. You'll stop at, here and there and see some sights along the way. Like here she is in Perga, showing us different places where Paul was, touring one of our groups. You'll enjoy some of that. Some of the food they'll feed you in some of these places, it rivals anything you've had in the world. From, cow tongue to octopus tentacle. I mean, you get to eat stuff you never imagined, and just sit there and frankly enjoy every minute of it. Here's a serendipity. Julie and I were in Jordan, and there's the Jordan River. And we're on the wrong side. She wants to go to the Holy Land. I said to her, well, just jump in, swim across, touch it, and come on back. You'll have been to the Holy Land. That didn't help. Our guide looked around, our director, and she was crying. He said, why are you crying? She says, I want to go to the Holy Land. He smiled and says, well, we're taking you to Petra, but tell you what, I'll give you 18 hours. Get across the bridge, get into Jerusalem. You've got 18 hours. Get back here to the bridge, because we had to catch the plane. So we ran where Jesus ran and saw Israel in 18 hours. And you know what? It was a total serendipity. And when you go, you'll experience some marvelous serendipities. The suffering. It's humbling. It's so humbling. Here's a grave marker in the Ukraine. They took us to this cemetery, and we walked all through this cemetery, and every single stone, they died in 1941 or 1942. There were 1,000 of these. And I said, well, how come all the years are the same? Well, it's real simple. In 1941, Stalin stole all the harvest from the Ukraine to pay cash to buy munitions, and 5 million Ukrainians starved in the famine. And the next year, Adolf Hitler invaded and killed 2 million more people. 7 million Ukrainians were killed in 2 years. We think about the Holocaust with the Jews. That was 6 million. We forget the fact that genocide is even taking place today all over the world. We were in Armenia, just tell you the name of that country. It's a Christian country. And we finished up there, and the guy says, well, we got a day left for sightseeing. What do you want to see? And I said, what do you got? And he says, well, we can go to the Genocide Museum. Boy, is that humbling. That was the only sight to show us in their country. So you see this, but you don't sit there. Because see, what happens is out of that comes the most amazing statements of faith you can ever imagine. Okay, you're not going to get out to the whole world. Let's send a little persecution here and you get out to the whole world. That's what happens oftentimes. And it's good for us to get over there and see some of this. I mean, we're blessed not to have it. In some ways, I won't even go into that sermon. We're blessed not to have it, but it's okay to have it. See that church on the screen? I'll tell you about the pastor. He was collecting materials to build that church until they got enough to start it. But see, some communists from the old regime came to him and said, if you don't stop what you're doing, you're going to regret it. They threatened him. And he didn't stop, kept collecting materials. And one night they beat the living daylights out of him, and he's left a quadriplegic. And the pastor of that church is a quadriplegic. Talk about faith. But look at the church that his members put together and built. And you just stand there. You will do this over and over and over, and you will marvel at the faith of these Christians in some of these places that just inspires the living daylights out of you at what God does to advance the kingdom through these folks. Oh, I hope you go. I hope you go. We'll help you go. You can make a difference. If you want to go, talk to our go people. And if you want to get overseas, we'll get you overseas. And when somebody in your ABF says, would you help? I'm raising money for this trip. Say, you bet I'll help you, because you can go next, you see. And of course, there's financial support that we give through our Go ministries. We're collecting $500,000 in pledges and gifts the next couple of weeks. And then you can pray. Go on a trip and be a prayer warrior, or pray back here. There's all kinds of ways you and I can literally make a difference for the kingdom. So, enjoy. Have fun at the street fair. Enjoy the morning. Rejoice with what God's doing around the world. And, I invite us all to be invested in the kingdom. It's a wonderful thing to share the gospel with the whole world, as well as our country and our state and our city. Now, give you a moment. We're going to pass out. Well, you've already got pledge cards. And you may not be ready this morning. You can do this next week. But if you are, I'm going to have our ushers come and we're going to pass the offering plate. And you can drop it in this morning if you like. Rez Derbyshire is going to sing while we do this. Rez was born in Thailand. She was a Muslim. She found Christ. Her mother and father said, well, we're cutting you off. See, that's what happens when Muslims become Christians. They cut her off. She said, well, my God will take care of me. Well, many of you know Doug and Daryl Cheryl Derbyshire from our church are now doctors in Thailand. And Rez married their son, Gary. And she's now a student in a Christian college in Phoenix. We'll be heading overseas with Gary to Thailand as soon as she graduates. So we're glad Rez is here. And we hope this morning as she sings, and the plate's passed, that now's a great time to get involved in the work we have in front of us. Rez, please.